Now, this is the rules that you have to make your parents follow. This is the rules for praising children.
Was a terrible mom today. I told Valerie she was pretty.
Oh no, didn't you get that article I sent you?
Yeah, Molly, don't you want her to love her for her whole self and not her outer shell?
I know, it just slipped out. I forgot. I'm not supposed to comment on her appearance. I'm simply supposed to say, you exist.
Right.
Well, don't feel too bad, because last night I told Anthony, good job for finishing his dinner.
Oh, Megan, come on. I sent you that link to that video. It's a brief 90 minutes. Make the time.
Yeah, you're gonna ruin his relationship with food for the rest of his life.
Well, I think I fixed it. After dinner, I flipped the whole table over and yelled at the whole family, "Terrible job eating!" Good moves.
Yeah, well, I'm in the same boat. Timothy did a drawing, and I told him it was great. And I even said I loved it.
Why did you do that? I sent you that blog post from momfarce.gov saying your comments should never be results-oriented.
I heard they're turning that blog post into a movie.
Oh, I can't wait.
What?
Yeah, that blog post, though, it said that you can only comment on the effort they put in.
Well, here's the bad news, guys. He didn't put any effort in at all. I think he's turning out to be a very gifted artist.
Don't tell him that.
I didn't! Once I realized it, I ran into my room and locked the door so I wouldn't be tempted.
Okay, parents are definitely getting messages about support and not support. If your parents are praising you too much, though, you have to say, shh, I only praise my effort. Anyway, let's see what we have. Do students today seem to have more difficulty now than, let's say, your last set of children, than they did previously, than you did. Being organized, complying with all instructions, planning long term, checking work for mistakes, keeping their notebooks, lockers, and backpacks organized. Are they more scattered? Now, many teachers would say yes, but here's another question before we resolve it. Is ADHD more frequent? Are students lazier, more rebellious, undisciplined, brain dead from videos? Or can their executive functions no longer meet today's demands? And what can you do about it? Obviously, I'm going with the latter. People born after 2000 have much more demands on this executive part of their brain than those born before. So it's not fair to say, oh, when I was a kid, well, when we were kids, we didn't have the demands on these developing networks that they have now. They have information age load. So much more information. Technology brings us more information, and globalization, if something is found, it becomes quickly globalized. It's not, you have to wait for a boat to come from South America to find out what Columbus is doing there. So there is more information. Books are bigger. I was once asked to teach an AP course, and I said, the book is so big, what do you do in class? Oh, we just answer questions and assign the reading. Not fair. So there is more information. Beyond that, there is much more compelling, immediate, desirable things, and convenient. The internet is so compelling, so convenient, and the social media involved with the internet is very demanding. Besides having to keep up with the information, there's the need to respond, especially as kids get older, adolescents and teens, to respond immediately with a witty comment and to leave your texting or your messaging on all night lest you miss out on anything. That's nothing that we had to grow up with. We had, television, music, but they have compelling, convenient, and about convenience. The idea that you can keep, you should watch kids, keep the computer in the living room, that's all a great temporary fix, but it's not the solution because contact lenses, implants will be having access to the internet. You won't be able to see whether your kid is on the internet because it will not be evident. So here's this issue, an executive functions gap. We'll talk about the executive functions and the good video about cats and dogs in a moment. Children's normal brain development of these powers is no longer adequate to meet the unique demands of the world in which they live. Today's children have greater demands on these highest brain functions. As I said, more information, changing facts, So not only is there more information, more technology, more globalization, but the things that they learn are changing. They have the compelling internet and the 24/7 social media demands, FOMO. Any of you know what FOMO stands for? I'm not going to ask the adults. Fear of missing out. And that's a real thing. So executive functions for unique demands. For example, much more information. As you'll see, there's much more misinformation and this fact-changing business. When I went to school, it was pretty annoying, but not that hard to memorize all the planets. We also had to memorize the moons, but when I went to school, there were like a total of 3 or 4 moons, one Jupiter, a couple at Saturn. It wasn't that hard. Now there are like dozens of moons, but suddenly they pull one of the planets out. And I spent a lot of time just memorizing the 9 planets. Actually, there are 2 potential candidates for new planets. But the problem was, when they took away Pluto, it was a shock to me, because all of this memorizing and being tested on planet names, I never learned what planetness is. I had no idea. So when it was taken away, it seemed arbitrary and unfair, and it made me never want to learn about a planet again. We need kids to not just have the facts, but to have the understanding. I wish I could have learned what planetness was. I'd be prepared when they take away another one or add another one. They have to be prepared to find solutions to problems we cannot prepare them for. We can't even recognize them yet. Can't teach them a solution if we can't even see the problem or the career, the jobs that have not yet come about. And prepared for these changes in facts. I can give you a reference, but this is not pure science, but one estimate is the facts now, when a child enters kindergarten, by the time they graduate 12th grade, about 50% of them will still be accurate. So now as there's all this information, plus you spend this time memorizing it, and there goes Pluto and other facts that keep changing. What are the skill sets employers now value the most? As you'll see in a few minutes with the cat and dog, they're the executive functions, whereas previously it was this factory model. Rote memory of facts and procedures. Can you do Excel? Can you type 30 words or 700 words a minute? I mean, it was very procedure and rote oriented. Now they don't care. I mean, the creative, interesting jobs, that's not what's valuable. Computers, robots, and outsourcing does that. They're looking for qualities of time management, the ability to find what's the best information and analyze its validity, because there's so much stuff out there. Creative problem solving, not a right answer. And the ability to collaborate and communicate, because with globalization and subspecialization, you can't just do it yourself. If it's a problem solution or an intervention, it's got to be collaborative. And certainly innovate beyond the latest information and technology. If you own a business, and you hire someone who can do everything that your business does right now, that's good. But when things change and new information comes out, a competitor comes up with a better way to do it or a different way of advertising it, then your employee is valuable to you only if they can also innovate beyond. Read the newest information, interpret it, and use it to innovate beyond. Which takes us to the specifics of what are these executive functions that I keep harping on. Well, you can think of them executive as the chief executive officer, these networks in the brain that sort of give the rest of the brain instructions that go beyond cause and effect or one answer. So let's see what an effective CEO needs to do for 21st century success with the promised cat and dog. We're going to have the cat and dog show us what some of the executive functions are. And for those of you who are very familiar with them, consider this a way to teach others what executive functions are rather than just give a list, because everybody's list of executive functions is different, and it should be. It should be a concept that you know what they do, and you can call them anything you want. So So I'm going to use an example with bias, which is one of the things executive functions help you recognize bias. So I'm going to use 2 biased YouTube videos so you can construct your own understanding of what these executive functions are. And I'll put a little deductive reasoning into it, which is also an executive function. So you're invited to identify, and I won't call on you for an answer, which list of characteristics best describes dog versus cats. Now, I said they are biased. So if you have a dog or cat, they're not in the equation. They're unique. Good, bad, but they're different. They're unique. What I want you to get from these biased videos is an essence of what I'm portraying as dogness or catness, not Hunger Games, but cats. So here's what I'll invite you to do. I'll show you some videos of a dog, some video of a cat. And I feel that one of them, the dogness or the catness, illustrates things like goal planning, logic, analysis, judgment, risk assessment, creative problem solving. And I feel that the other one, by elimination, demonstrates agility and grooming and mood shifts. So take a look at the videos and see which characteristics you think are representative in the biased video of dogness.
Does not want to get in the water to get this ball, and watch how it finds a way to get to this ball.
Okay, so with this bias, that's going to be the essence of dogness, and here's going to be the essence of catness. Okay, so with that as your essence-ness, I'm going to show you some, again, 3 biased photos, but now some factual numbers before I invite you to decide which one is the executive function list. In a cat's brain, the region called the prefrontal cortex, where these executive function networks are, and they're developing especially during the school years, that part of the brain only makes up 3% by volume. In a dog, it makes up 10% of the brain, and a human, the most of all mammals, 20%. So that's a little information. And here's another very biased picture, obviously not only biased, but totally fake, of a cat's brain to help guide you in the direction I'm trying to push you in. Anatomy of a cat's brain. Really teeny there is ability to get along with others center, and even smaller, a remorse center. So you've had biased information, some valid information, leaving you hopefully with the dogness representing executive functions of the 2 lists. So with the dog video, there was evidence of reasoning, analysis, judgment, risk assessment, creative problem solving. Cat gets grooming. So that is, to me, much better way of getting the essence of walking away with what is executive functions. What was the dog doing versus cat not doing? So executive functions are indeed the skill sets for negotiating the world that kids born after 2000 have to deal with, that their brains are not planned to build these skills yet. Focusing attention, organizing, prioritizing, judgments, decision making, risk assessment, analyzing validity and value. From this vast sea of media, there is no longer a clear division between fact and bias on news channels, in periodicals and newspapers. I spend time talking because I write for papers and get interviewed, and there is nothing that other people with more knowledge of media can say, yes, anything that's in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, that's double checked and not biased. Everything has gotten very blurred, and not only is there more stuff that they have to evaluate, because where do I really look, but the blurring of validity is questionable. So just so you can continue to hear what I have to say without thinking that I don't like cats, because some of you have cats, maybe cats are developing bigger prefrontal cortexes where these executive functions are. Because when this cat gets caught barking, and he does an amazing bark, by a human, he resumes meowing. And I promise I'll answer the question unless you want to, but why? Really good bark, wasn't it? Okay, so why does the cat resume meowing? My opinion, he doesn't want anyone to know. Hope you guys laugh at this joke because it's like for kids. He's bowlingual. Yeah, I taught 7th grade for way too long. Anyway, here's the deal with executive functions. We have a way difference now that we've never had before, and it's only going to keep expanding between supply and demand. The human brain has not changed in terms of evolutionary efficiency in 10 to 20,000 years. So we can't say, oh, well, the demands on executive functions are increasing, so the brain will catch up. That's not going to happen on its own during anybody's immediate lifetime. So although kids are not born with these brain networks of executive function developed beyond basic, they're born with the potential to develop them. And that's the good news. The skill sets that they need now and earlier than ever before are actually growing and changing and responsive to experiences in their prefrontal cortex. The rate of change, the responsiveness, like in that prefrontal cortex, is so profound during the school years that you indeed, by providing experiences, opportunities, and challenges, you are the brain changers and their guides to developing now the circuits that, left to themselves, won't be really up to the task until their mid-20s. And here's the thing. Here, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain up here where these networks are growing, it's the last part of the brain to go through what we call maturation. This is a good thing. What maturation means is high responsiveness. For example, if you're talking about muscles, and there was a certain time period when everything that any exercise you did made your muscles become twice as strong as if you did it during any other period. So your workout for 10 minutes would equal a 20-minute workout during this responsive maturation phase. Well, that's what's happening in these executive functions during the school years. We think of, we used to think that everything major happens in the brain during the first 6 months of life, and then no major changes can take place. That's certainly not true, and it's especially true for this highest brain power. And that's because of something called neuroplasticity, very familiar to many of you. But it's a phenomenon that I was first familiar with in my practice of neurology. It's what let people who have strokes or tumors removed or bleeds in their brain, who had lost a lot of brain cells, brain tissue, and yet by using what was left in their brain or stimulating it or trying to do things, they were actually able to regain skills. Turns out that neuroplasticity is the power that we want to tap into so that these brain powers of executive function have become mature, become strong, become well functioning 10 years before the normal lag at age 25, because they need them now more than ever. So neuroplasticity. Almost 100 years ago, neuroscientist Hebb said, neurons that fire together wire together. And that's the story of neuroplasticity. What does it mean? Well, you have these circuits of every memory, of every skill, of everything that you know. And the circuits hold, each neuron in a circuit has to be connected to a bunch of other neurons because they each only hold a teeny bit of a memory. So what makes something more memorable or stronger or a skill get better? It's activation. It's the firing. So every time something that one has learned or is beginning to learn, or executive functions that are so little basic during early childhood, but every time there's an opportunity to use it, which means there's firing going on from cell to cell, it gets stronger throughout life, but profoundly during the child and adolescent years. So neuroplasticity, the firing to the wiring, it means that the electric impulse that's going from carrying information from one nerve cell to another, that's the firing. So you're using a circuit, a memory, a skill, kicking a soccer ball, playing an instrument. If if you're using that skill set, there's firing going on. The brain responds to use by making the connections, the wiring, stronger. It makes a lot of sense because the brain is a very high demand part of the body. It uses so much energy. So it makes sense that if a circuit is used a lot in the brain, it does things to that circuit that makes it stronger, faster, more durable, so it doesn't even get pruned away. So every time a circuit is used, now let's go back to the executive functions that are so responsive to this stimulation during school years 5 to 18. Every time you try, a child begins to use judgment or has an opportunity to prioritize or has an opportunity to interpret data for validity or to assess risk, plan a decision in advance. Every time those circuits in the prefrontal cortex have an opportunity to be activated, whether they're successful or not, the electricity is going through them, carrying the little bit of information from one neuron to another. That's the firing, and it will get stronger. You'll get more of these dendrite connections. You'll get more of this insulation around the axon. And those changes in response to a circuit being used make it faster and stronger, which otherwise is going to be slow. And yeah, when they're 25, but they need it now. So we can, during these special years of high responsiveness to use, take advantage of the bonus of helping kids use these circuits so they will go stronger and be available sooner. One option, go to the toy store and ask, which generates the most synapses, the other part of neuroplasticity. But this is neuroplasticity taking place. This is not a human's brain, but as a circuit is stimulated, watch how the connections form. Those are these dendrites that connect one neuron to another. It's being activated, and that clicking in. That's so cool. That's learning. That's changing the brain because the circuit was used. The firing made the wiring right in front of our eyes. So one thing to keep in mind is what kids need to know about their neuroplasticity, because there's a lot of messages that they interpret during the school years from inference or direct comments that genius is that you inherit what you got. I'm not good in math because my parents aren't good. I've been told that I don't pay enough attention. I just can't do it. It's not my skill. They get messages that their capabilities are limited, one of which by genetics. So untrue. They need to know, their teachers, their parents need to know that neuroplasticity is totally available equally to everybody. To the patients I had who had strokes in their 90s, to little babies who were born with half a brain. The fact is, neuroplasticity is limitless, and different speeds of learning in this neuroplasticity take place in different people at different times. But it's important for kids to see they've already changed their brain with neuroplasticity. When they started keyboarding or bike riding or playing a musical instrument or a sport, anything that they didn't do with great ease because they had to practice. What did the practice do? It was the firing, the circuit of kicking that ball or playing the instrument or keyboarding when it was like one at a time. What made it get better? Yeah, the practice science-y thing made it get better. Every time it was used, thought about, or applied, the circuits got stronger. Neuroplasticity came to the circuit, gave it more myelin, gave it more connections, and made it more powerful and faster. So that facility, if a child doesn't think they're capable of doing math or of focusing or of having better judgment, point out how they have done the whole neuroplastic power when they went from not keyboarding to keyboarding or anything else that they developed. And as I said, those networks of the executive functions are the last part of the brain to go through this high response period. So this rapid maturation means that when you help kids activate the circuits, giving them opportunity to organize, prioritize, make judgments, sending the power through the circuits, and the amount of dendrites, the amount of myelin insulation is going to be particularly powerful during these school years. I think a loud noise might come. Maybe after. So rapid maturation, no door ever closes on neuroplasticity throughout life, but you get like twice the power for using it. Twice is not a sciencey term. It might be 3 times, it might be 1/2, but definitely more power for it. Here's an example of a video. It's a weird depiction of the brain. The eyes would kind of be down here, the spinal cord here. But this arrow is pointing to the place in the brain where you could best see the myelin in the prefrontal cortex, these executive functions. And what you'll see in the next one, which is time lapse, you'll see how the amount of myelin, the maturation phase, starts out on the out and bottom side, but you'll see as between ages 5 and 18, the whole brain will develop this blue color, which means it's had its fast maturation. Doesn't mean it's done, but it's had its fast response phase until you get to the prefrontal cortex, which is still going responsively until age 25. So blue, 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 but as you watch here, the prefrontal cortex, so it's limitless power. There's no limit to how strong a memory, a skill, a body of knowledge can get with neuroplasticity. Limitless. What it takes, though, is activating the circuit and opportunities to do so with really good conditions. Somebody who can give feedback of progress going on, or a technique like keyboarding where you get feedback that you're making progress and when you're making a mistake. But with that opportunity to change, to practice, limitless. There's a loud one. Rapid maturation. The executive function networks are at their peak responsiveness to firing, making wiring during these school years. So whatever you can provide kids with that makes these circuits of executive function fire and be activated, you're going to get even more of the strength. I'll let you read that one. If you don't have teenagers yet, you will totally believe it. But the cerebral cortex, prefrontal cortex, that's where the executive functions are. And you kind of wish you could wait until your kid has them before you let them out of the room, certainly behind the wheel of a car. So what are some examples of how to provide opportunities for the firing in these circuits that are so critical and also so responsive? Give them opportunities to activate them, to exercise them, just like using a muscle, activating it makes it stronger, especially during childhood and adolescence when that neuroplasticity in this part of the brain is most responsive. So here are some examples. Attention focus, that's something that it seemed, one of the questions I posed, does it seem that kids don't pay as much attention or are more scattered? And my proposal is no, they just have more stuff that the demand is on their neural circuits, so many pulls away from the middle focus and so many demands of what they have to learn. So how can we help build their attention focus now instead of waiting until they're in their late teens, early 20s? And it relates to how you can force yourself to pay attention. Because the way you can pay attention is not because you're smarter than your kids or more dedicated to success. It's because you've got the wiring that does, even left alone, make these circuits particularly efficient, responsive, and successful by the mid-20s. They only have little nubs. So what you're able to do to pay attention, you're able to get your executive functions to tell your brain, no matter what's happening, stay focused on this. Without the circuits, they can't, unless you help them build it. So activities where they need to think before following their first response, because their brains are wired to be impulsive, to follow immediate reactions. And that's good for juvenile animals in the wild, exploring their environments, but that's the brain that kids have until they wire up well. So a game like Simon Says, that's teaching not to do your first impulse. If you do the first thing Simon says or Simon doesn't say, you're going to get it wrong. Red light, green light. Again, you have to think before just acting. Multiple solutions. Great time is when kids ask you a question, why is the sky blue, or why can't I have more allowance? Always great to turn it around and say, why do you think? And to encourage more than one solution. I think and work a bit on refugee kids. So many hundreds of thousands of kids who will never even see the inside of a classroom and may not even be with parents to help build executive functions. So the one thing I feel is most valuable for people who come in contact with these kids, the other people in the camps or leaving, is to invite them to answer their questions and invite multiple solutions. It's a big executive function builder, and it's preparing their brain for their present and future more so than having them memorize the planets. So they ask a question, or you ask them a question that they're interested in, and always say, whenever you can, what else? They give you an answer, they give you a proposal, what else? That's going to build executive functions. Slow movements and observations. You like to play catch, they like to play catch with a ball, sometimes try it with a balloon, much slower. They may not like handwriting practice, I don't blame them, but calligraphy might appeal. Mazes, doing mazes. That's slowing things down. You don't just draw a line from A to B. And if you can draw a maze with as they build skills, not to just try and go back, to try to look at it and make the least number of dead ends before solving it. Find Waldo books. Aligning a compass. You have one on your cell phone, they probably have one on their smartphone. Aligning it not just to north, but to find something that's 17 degrees northeast, and ask them to align it and find it, and there's something there. So you say, what do you find when you're there? And you've already in advance looked to see that it's something different. I have an eclipse. No, I don't want them looking at eclipse. But if they align it just a certain way, they'll see that statue or that picture. Play. A little promo for play and what it does to executive functions. 2 groups of toddlers. Group 1, age 2 to 3. They were trained via procedures. Do this, how to activate a music machine. So the teacher, the examiner, said, if you use the orange block here, you'll make the music come on. Or in some cases, you take the L-shaped block and put it here. So, they acquired this skill. They could be little robots. But in group 2, they weren't told step by step the task. All they did was see the experimenter activate the music machine so that they knew something could happen when they did something. They were not given a procedure, step-by-step demonstration. And they discovered the rules and concepts by independent play, trial and error. That's building executive function. That's building trial and error. That's building frustration tolerance. That's building attention. And a brain that can adapt, can deal with change, setbacks. That's the brains we want. Of one for older kids to build their attention focus. It's very hard to stay on one website. You guys probably know from reports or homework, told to do a web search, but you get on a website and there's so many other things that look more interesting than just that website. Oh yeah, but you can buy something or you watch a commercial and win $1, get $1. I mean, there's great tangents, very appealing. But it's going to take much more time, and the brain is not going to get as much out of it, and it's not going to build attention, focus, and long-term goal achievement by following every tangent. The problem is their brain is programmed to get immediate gratification, and they don't have the executive function to step back and say, wait a minute, it's not a good idea to do it now. Their brains are telling them, their normal brains for their age are saying, you better go to that link right now because you'll never get it again. This is your only chance. That's what their brains are telling them. So you have to acknowledge that. Say, I bet it's very frustrating to only keep 6 links open. So your brain is doing that. It's a normal thing at your age. So here's a strategy, cut and paste the hyperlinks. But acknowledging that you understand that it's going to be very hard for them. Just because it's not hard for you, their brain doesn't have the programming. So recognizing their brain development level and helping them with strategies, not criticism. How about executive function of organizing and prioritizing? How can we build these things without it being more work? I mean, our kids don't need like more homework or Kumon math or go to executive function school. They need the executive functions, but they don't need, I don't know, a club or a teacher. So you can, these are things that they have to want to do whatever the task is that's going to build their executive functions. It has to be personally meaningful and part of their life, not, okay, we're going to do some organizing and prioritizing. So here are some examples. Especially kids who've been told, maybe not by you, but, or have taken on the diagnosis, oh, I'm disorganized, it's just who I am, I can't ever do any better. That's the message many kids get. So first, before we even invite them to organize something, or prioritize or use judgment, any of these executive functions, point out to them that they already have done it successfully. So an example before you help them build organizing skill sets is let them know that they already do it. Hey, how do you sort your music on a playlist? Oh, that is organizing. Model your organizational strategies, but without like, oh, I'm so cool, I organize my everything. Do it naturally and with the humble humility that you did have when you couldn't find anything for a week because you didn't have organization. So if they ask for something, it's not like, come see my files. If they ask for something, and it's true, you say, if you would have asked me for this like last year or 6 months ago, I'd find it maybe a week from now. But thank goodness I did this color coding. So that's it. It's not like a lecture. It's just sharing an experience. Now, you still want to build up their awareness that it's something they do and understand. It's not like something that's out of their power, and that it's relevant. They're interested. So ask their opinions about organizing relevant to something that they're interested in. So what organizational reasoning do you see in the types of music in award categories? The schedule of classes at school during the day or the schedule of the school year? Once again, they have to be interested in it, have an opinion. You're asking them what organizational reason, why do you think it's organized that way? Then the big buy-in is, how could it be improved? What would you do to make it better? So it's cool to be the expert and to be asked your opinion. Then same things with prioritizing. Prioritizing, the executive function means planning tasks, the amount of time to, if it's a task like a report, how much time should I spend on the cover page, on the glitter, on the body of it, on the bibliography. So there's the order of tasks for one to do, and there's the amount of time to designate to each, because most kids, without planning and prioritizing, will spend more time on the web cover or the glitter. So the other part of prioritizing is distinguishing lower relevance details from the main details. That's critical with so much information, as is evaluating the relative value of all of this information. So again, how can this be something that they'd want to do embedded into their normal days? This, depending on their age, would be pleasant. Select 3 items in a category, so whatever they're interested in, sports graphs or clothes or hairstyles, advertisements for these items. Select 3 that you think are really good. It could be a hairstyle, it could be a sports uniform. As long as they think they're good, they select 3. Only after they've made their selection of ones that they consider very good, then you say, okay, put them in order of which one you think is the best, the second best, and the third best. They've already said they're good, so they'll do that. Then, and only then, do you say, what characteristics, what qualities did you use now that you look back on what you put 1, 2, and 3? How did you determine that? They just did it. They're the experts. Now they're beginning to develop skill sets and metacognition and the ability to transfer an experience out and the confidence that they can do it. Yeah, I did put it in order. I guess I did have a reason. And then there it is. Because we can't give them lists and charts of how to evaluate every website or every item for validity because we don't know the nature of information dissemination 5 years from now. So they're recognizing they did it and how did they do it. Prioritizing importance. If there's something that was interesting, a photograph, a picture, a painting, a story, a film, where it's an opinion. What did you think was the main idea or the most important detail in this photograph, in this clip of the sporting action, this story or this movie? What did you think was the main idea or most important detail? Where opinions count, and then why? And what else? Tweeting. It's really good. So many reasons. 140 characters or less. When they want to prioritize importance, if they have a lot of notes to take or a story to read or a paragraph to look at or directions that they are reading for a computer program or assembling a toy, after they read it, say, you can know how to tweet. In 140 spaces or less, what was the essence, the gist, the most important thing, the highest, the thing that most clearly explains what you want to remember about these instructions or this paragraph or this story? In order to concisely put it into that space, they are actively, mentally manipulating it and understanding it in a way that they can represent it in that short a space. It increases memory, and it's minds on, and they're building prioritizing skills. I used to ask students to write notes on what they read, and they'd either copy the whole thing or the main headings. Tweeting changed it. And it doesn't have to be with a phone or a device. It can be on a piece of paper. Skip them if it's before. Well, good, we're not. Skip 4. All right, judgment and decision making. Let's explore judgment. Your brain's first response may not be the best one. What color is this slide? Oh, it's an Australian letter spelling. Just say white. It's not a trick question, just say white. All right, what does a cow drink? What happened? The brain is programmed to follow patterns, and it really helps us get through the day, interpret our world, because things that are experienced together form patterns, and it lets us do things like read and make decisions and not have to re-identify everything when we're walking from here to there. It's great for efficiency, but not so great for judgment and jumping to conclusions. We want to help kids recognize that that's their brain's default programming. How can we help them even be aware of it enough to think about it? It's not going to be by telling them, oh yeah, when you do a multiple choice test, be sure you read all of them because it might not be the first one. That's very hollow to a brain that's still building executive functions and is programmed for immediate gratification. So they need experiences evaluating information beyond their impulsive first response. So share examples like the one I gave you, or here's one. Participate, please. How do you spell poke? P. Good. How do you spell joke? And what do you call the white of an egg? First thing that came to mind was yolk. But it's not. It's the white or the albumin. So experiences like that, or how many animals of each species did Moses bring on the ark? First thing coming to mind is going to be, I won't make you say it, but oh, I know that. A kid would see it. And most of us would see it and say, but kids have said to me, wow, my parents are having too much margarine because, they're having troubles. What this is really showing is that correlation does not equal causation, and that just because things move so well over time doesn't mean that one causes another, because margarine consumption does not cause divorce. participating in family decisions where they get to use their judgment, but only when you're going to actually take their information or their choices into consideration. Don't say, what do you think? And they say something, oh, good idea, and ignore it. So if you're going to let them have some say, if they can prove validity and why it's okay to have pizza 3 times a week instead of once, if they can look at the food chart and validate that choice, you'd be prepared to go with it. Vacations, big purchases. I mean, if you say we're going to buy a new family car, what would you think we should get? And they said, oh, Ferrari. Well, these are criteria that we kind of need for a family. There are 4 of us. So what would you say about number of seats? And you have this like normal conversation back and forth, and you really do allow them to see alternative cars within a budget and that fits the needs. So be ready to consider their options once they get to use judgment. And my favorite, tic-tac-toe. Never will you lose a game of tic-tac-toe if you're using judgment. You'll tie, but you'll never lose if you make considered decision-making. What it'll show, if they think in advance, this will cause them to do this or them to do this. So it will teach the consequences of choices, and it illustrates the rewards of thinking ahead. You can't lose. So the feedback is instant. If they lose a game, what didn't they consider? Fun and easy. Now I'll stick to the timing zone. Help children build their neural networks of executive function now, and they will have the wisdom to solve the problems and pursue the opportunities that await them in the future that we can't advise them about because we don't know. And with the executive functions they develop, your children will be able to think outside the box, know what's in it, have the foundational knowledge, but here's an example of out of the box. So, free access to things that I write. You can just say Judy Willis, and it'll take you to Things for Parents, Psychology Today, NBC, Parent Toolkit. Honestly, you put my name and you put a topic you want into Google, and it'll link, because that's what I do. Did I already turn mine off? It's telling me again. No, it is. All right, 8 o'clock, it's your turn. Questions, comments, ideas, challenges, anything you want to discuss. These guys are going to go home and get the puppy or kitten. I guess tonight you have to get a dog, because I already showed you about, the judgment and the executive functions. But now I also told your family, let the kids make some of the decisions. Think of a valid debate explanation. Asking parents, why not? They'll tell you why not. Think about how could that be solved. It's worth it. But just don't ask me to clean up the poop. So any other thoughts? There's lots of other executive functions, but honestly, whether you want to build their judgment, their risk assessment, think about first how they already show it and use it. Think about things they like, where they can assess it. Was it good having that pitcher come in at the last inning, or was it good to experiment on the cooking show? Whatever they have an opinion about, asking them what they would have done differently, that's building executive functions. Yes?
So your slide where you had the 2 groups, and I know the research date on that was April of 2017, and you said the second group that showed more positive outcomes.
Yes.
Talk about that just a little bit, and why the different inputs led to a better output for the second group.
The play research, right. Yeah. That things are more memorable. Knowledge becomes wisdom, or information becomes conceptual understanding when it's constructed by the brain, not when it's given to you. Think of all the things. I think I once figured it out. I spent like 50,000 hours in class. Do I even know 50,000 things? Absolutely not. And that's per hour. Why don't I even know one thing per hour? Because much of it was just given, put into a little rote memory loop, because I was diligent. I memorized everything and spent my time just memorizing one right answer. Those become unconnected bits of information that only become activated when you ask a specific question. It doesn't become a way of solving problems. The kids who had the better outcome weren't there trying to say A to B, B to C linearly. They were exploring. And when you get to explore, your brain is pulling in things you already know, trying something out, revising the memory and the skill. That's using so many circuits. It is stimulating so much neuroplasticity, but you can't duplicate that by an assembly line. And the main thing that's happening with play or guided play or solving problems on their own is the brain is connecting very strongly multiple areas so that later, when it needs to find a solution, it certainly won't find it in just that same assembly line, but it has these neural connections that make it an operating interactive brain, and it's much more fun. Kids will play with toys longer if they're not shown, you do this, you do this, this, and the bubbles come out. The amount of interest they'll have in it will last longer, so you're even saving money. So it's the opportunity to construct your own understanding and solve problems that's interesting, engaging, builds the dopamine for another night, but it's what makes kids want to know things when they're little, and sometimes when they get to school, they're not able to explore and investigate because of schedules. But we want that to be something they experience whenever they can, not just one way, your way, many ways. So cool. What do you think? And what else? Those phrases. What do you think and what else? Just doing that. It's not a just. Doing that. And we sometimes don't get to do that because of time limitations. But I want to know why. I want to know how. I want to know now. That you're not really helping when you tell rather than help them build it.
So you have to kind of provide a way for them to engage beyond just what you say.
Nice. For them to discover, figure it out.
So that,
With help. You're not going
Right.
to say,
right, yeah, the parameters.
yeah.
I said that you can teach yourself how to think about things if you'll think about it.
If you think about it.
You can create connections, make
Exactly.
connections that will cause more.
That's changing the brain. That is that is bloodless brain surgery. Thinking about something. You can do something, try something over and over, like solving a math problem. You could spend weeks solving it. And then suddenly we interpret it as, oh, I suddenly figured out, I had a flash of insight. No such thing. What happened was you were building this area of knowledge, you were trying this out, you were getting the feedback of what worked a little, what didn't work at all, building all these little micro networks that were growing their dendrites out, and when you had enough, they hooked in, you brought it on by thinking all of that time.
So if my answer to your question, if my answer to your question is a question that is designed to lead you to a place where you can own the answer from the standpoint that you are now empowered to have the answers, that's a better service than if I just say, well, it's blue,
Yeah.
or it's green, or whatever the answer is.
Right. What do you get from that? You get to
Well-
parrot it back. You have, and the memory you get, even if you ask your kid every day, so what color is the sky? What color is the sky? Every time they say blue, yeah, that circuit becomes stronger. They can say blue as quickly as you say a cow drinks milk because that circuit is used all the time. But it's useless beyond that.
Because when you change the question or the discussion, then they don't have the answer anymore.
That's right. It's only retrievable by the rote way they memorize it. Sky is blue, sky is blue, sky is blue. You ask them something else, like why is pool water blue and the bottom is white? I have no idea. They are not making connections. And knowledge is not what we know, it's what we can do with what we know. If you're answering something that is going to give them a fact to know, okay, it's sometimes useful, but it's not going to be transferable, it's not going to be usable in other ways. I love your explanations. You are good. You give the talk with me next time. But thank you. It's scary to, but you're obviously you've got confidence. You've got executive functions. Your mama did a good job, or dad, or teacher. Good. Yeah, that's a real evidence of time. It's so, for teachers, for parents, teachers, we sometimes don't ask complex questions for fear that some kids won't get it and they'll be frustrated and then act out. Or we sometimes give quick answers because there's only a few minutes and if they want the answer and we really don't have time for Socratic dialogue. But that's a disservice. Think about efficiency versus the brain structure. It's why certain people with dementia that both get the same Alzheimer's disease, both get the same rate of dropping out of neurons. The people who've done more of the thinking, solving, learning new things, have all these extra roadways. So even when their neurons start dropping out, and you can see the same brain scan, because this one who learned and explored and developed ideas, they have these extra roads. So the ones that drop out can hitchhike on these roads that are left. It's called cognitive reserve. And it's seriously powerful. So build it young. The facts are going to change. They need the thinking. I think you all would have known everything that I've said tonight because you are involved and observant. But it's useful to pass it on and to remember it. Like why my phone keeps beeping. Yeah.
So what is the impact of stress on the development of the prefrontal cortex? Because in our community, there was a Harvard study done in Mecklenburg County or city of Charlotte. It was like 50th when it comes to the ability to move out of poverty if you're born into poverty in this community. So what would be levers that we could do, that we could use to actually move that needle? And so I'm trying to understand the impact of stress, whether it is relationship stress in the family or poverty or social exclusion.
That's very valid, and the good news is reversible. So whether it's stress in utero from fetal alcohol syndrome, stress growing up from malnutrition or abuse or failure to make connections, whether it's an adult who's had trauma, repetitive concussions, regardless, stress will damage brain cells, and it remains reversible. Reversible partly because other cells, other structures will take over. But studies like, especially like studies on the Romanian orphans, kids in Mississippi who were in this a community with an A, Algonquin. In any case, they had brain loss, especially in the cortex, less cognitive abilities over time, again, with the right circumstances, with motivation, a mentor, and feedback, and an understanding. Otherwise, they've lost hope, and they just see they're behind everybody else. But when they understand their power of neuroplasticity and have guidance and feedback that they're making progress, the brain itself will regain. It may not physically grow bigger, but the neural networks can become normalized. But it's very hard to motivate that. That's where the effort comes in from the adults. So it's stress damages, and it can be repaired.
To piggyback on what he just said, there's been a lot of talk in this community on funding much earlier quality childhood education and getting that as close to age 0 as we can. When you talked about that
Peak years.
the peak, can you define that again? Is there a case? I mean, the case is I have heard 0 to 3 is we get the biggest bang for the buck.
Okay, so the thing is, neuroplasticity in the prefrontal cortex is at its highest responsiveness. This 0 to 3, let's say, the main thing the brain is doing throughout is building lots of connections. It's just sucking stuff in and getting lots of raw materials. So it has these like circuits that sometimes are dead ends. It has a lot of wiring, but they're not well connected, nor are they efficiently myelinized. They're there. They're very great to have. The early years, having lots of experiences, hearing enriched vocabulary, having opportunities to experience, interpret emotions and get feedback about. All of that is building their raw materials that become stronger toward executive functions or toward bodies of knowledge in the later years, when the ones that haven't been used are pruned away. And that's normal. There's so much stuff in there, everything that, because it's very successful, this wiring, but there's way too much stuff that the brain could not efficiently hold it. So provide the background and the experience and the exposures so that the raw materials are there. Then during those prefrontal cortex years of high neuroplasticity, activate the evaluation of that data actively. It'll just be pruned away without doing anything, the ones that aren't used. That's what's the other half of what's happening during maturation in a part of the brain is ones that aren't used, use it or lose it. They're pruned away. The ones that are used the most are made the strongest. And during those years of rapid maturation, use the ones that we know they're going to need a lot. But that doesn't take away the critical nature of experiences and exposures very early when this real powerful growth of circuits and connections are happening, not the durable efficiency, the powerful growth. I mean, you could look at a brain of a 0 to 3-year-old and see more and more and more looks like trees with branches. It looks like a great forest. You look at the brain a few years later, there's a lot less stuff, but it's thicker and more connected.
Can you maybe speak to creativity? Because I see a lot of no stats on this. I see a lot of information that children are processing, a lot of information, and even dissecting that information and coming out with the risk assessments. But it seems, just observations, that the creativity seems to be dwindling away in terms of coming up with something new and not just this is going to turn out good. So
That's a real big price to pay for memorizing and parroting back, because the efficiency of teaching to the tests or high stakes testing, when there really is one answer they're looking for, that takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of mental effort, and it still programs the brain for what's called the factory model. I would even say as a teacher, what's the answer? Or stop when I would ask one person. So the system, especially of high stakes tests, but of the factory model where education was initially to prepare people to go out and do things that were very systematic. So with that mentality or focus, there's not much room for creativity. What creativity tests, even one from maybe the 50s, it still is really cool. How many ways can you think of to use a brick? Now, what is a brick? So that will be more promoting of creativity. How many ways can you think of to use, or with kids, even older students, I'd bring in, let's say, an egg beater, hand egg beater. It's novel to begin with, but they'd go around in a circle and say, this is not an egg beater, it is a kite string rewinder. Next person, this is not an egg beater, it drills 2 holes in the sand. Alternate uses, alternate explanations. That needs to be maintained, or we do lose creativity and thinking out of the box and the ability to change when facts do. So always ask why and what else.
So I want to go back to the very first video where the mom sitting and talking about
The phrase.
the right way to get
Right,
feedback.
right.
So what is the answer
The right
to that
way.
question?
Okay.
I don't want to think about it.
Right.
I'll take an answer.
I'll give you an answer. You can also put in my name and say praise on Google, and you'll see an article I did for NBC. Praise for effort, not just for effort. Praise for outcome, not just for outcome. Specific praise. If I'm going to tell you one thing, it's specific. Not I like your picture, and also not being afraid to like the picture. I like the way you use shading. Just specific. Then they appreciate progress and realize, don't get this mistaken belief that, oh, I'm so good at everything, and then they finally hit the wall and get the first C, and they think, I'm a fraud, and they don't have the confidence to try that wall again. So be specific and truthful. Good? As I said, you already are doing everything right because you're here and your kids are in schools that are, and you care. So just spread the word, keep making the good citizens. They're going to be pushing my wheelchair. I want to know that they know which direction to go in.